Hey there, I'm Sophia, a 35-year-old single mom just trying to make sense of this crazy world. It's just me, my amazing 12-year-old daughter, Emily, and our little home in the suburbs. It might not be fancy, but it's ours. I work as a nurse, putting in long, grueling shifts to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Emily is a special kid, sharp as a tack and bursting with creativity. She's got this wild curly hair that could give Rapunzel a run for her money, and she loves expressing herself through it. Then there's Gertrude, my ex-mother-in-law and constant headache. She's a 68-year-old widow who lives far too close for comfort. Sure, she helps out with Emily after school, but her nagging drives me up the wall. Sophia, don't you think Emily's hair is a bit wild? Gertrude's voice grates on my nerves as I hurry to get ready for work. I take a deep breath. It's just hair, Gertrude. She likes it that way. In my day, young ladies knew how to present themselves properly. She huffs. I bite my tongue, reminding myself that beggars can't be choosers when it comes to free childcare. Thank God for Sarah, my best friend and fellow nurse. She's my anchor, always there to listen or lend a hand with Emily when Gertrude becomes unbearable. Girl, I don't know how you deal with that old bat, Sarah says over coffee one day. You've got the patience of a saint. I laugh. Trust me, it's running thin. Then there's Michael, my neighbor. He's a total sweetheart, always offering to help around the house. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't noticed how he looks at me. But after everything with Emily's dad, I'm in no rush to dive back into the dating scene. Hey, Sophia, need a hand with that? Michael calls out as I fumble with some boxes in the driveway. Thanks, Michael, you're a lifesaver, I say, trying not to notice how his shirt clings to his arms as he lifts the box. Life isn't perfect, but with good neighbors and the occasional handsome handyman, it's not all bad. The real drama in my life is the constant tug-of-war with Gertrude over how to raise Emily. Emily, sit up straight, a lady doesn't slouch, Gertrude scolded during dinner one night. I saw Emily's shoulders slump even more. Mom, do I have to listen to her? Emily asked, her eyes pleading with me. Just try your best, sweetie, I said, shooting Gertrude a sharp look. We all have different ideas about what's important, I added. Different ideas indeed, Gertrude muttered under her breath. If you just listened to me, Sophia, that child wouldn't be running wild. I clenched my fists under the table. Emily is not running wild, she's expressing herself, and I won't stifle that. Mark my words, Sophia, Gertrude said, her voice icy. Without proper discipline, that girl will end up in trouble. As I watched Emily retreat to her room, her wild curls bouncing behind her, I wondered how long I could keep this delicate balance. Something had to give, and when it did, it wasn't going to be pretty. I was dead on my feet after another grueling shift at the hospital. All I wanted was to hug my baby girl and collapse into bed. But the moment I stepped through the door, I knew something was wrong. Emily, sweetie, I'm home, I called out. But there was no answer, just an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I found her curled up in bed, sobbing. When she looked up at me, my heart nearly stopped. Her beautiful curls were gone, every single one. Her head had been shaved clean. Mom, Emily wailed, throwing herself into my arms. Grandma, she did it while I was sleeping. I held her tightly, my mind spinning. Shoo, baby, it's okay. We'll fix this, I whispered, but inside, I was screaming. How could Gertrude do this to my child? Fury surging through me, I stormed into the living room where Gertrude sat, calm as ever. What the hell did you do? I shouted. She didn't even flinch. I did what needed to be done. That child was becoming far too vain and disobedient. Vain? Disobedient? She's a 12-year-old girl, I snapped. Precisely, Gertrude replied coolly. It's high time she learned some discipline. This isn't your day, Gertrude, I cut her off, shaking with rage. This is assault, I'm calling the police. Gertrude scoffed. Don't be dramatic. Sophia, I've put up with your lenient parenting long enough. Someone had to step in before Emily turned into a delinquent like her father. That's when I lost it. Get out of my house, now. Gladly, Gertrude sneered, gathering her things. Mark my words, you'll regret not heeding my advice. That girl needs a firm hand. as the door slammed behind her. The full weight of what had just happened hit me like a ton of bricks. I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. Then suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Michael at the door, his face full of concern. "Sophia, is everything okay?" I heard shouting. One look at me, and he knew it wasn't. "What happened?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. I couldn't find the words. My throat tightened, and all I could do was point toward Emily's room. Michael walked in, and when he saw her, his eyes widened in shock. "Oh my God, who did this?" "Gertrude," I managed to choke out, my voice trembling with fury. His expression hardened. "That's it. I'm calling the police." "No," Emily cried, her voice breaking. "I don't want anyone to see me like this." She looked so small, so vulnerable. I pulled her into my arms, trying to soothe her. "It's okay, baby. We won't do anything you're not comfortable with," I whispered, my heart aching. Michael knelt beside us, his tone gentle. "Is there anything I can do?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Sophia, what's going on? I got your missed call, and you sounded upset in the voicemail." Through my sobs, I tried to explain. "Gertrude, she shaved Emily's head." "That evil witch," Sarah exclaimed. "I'm coming over right now." In no time, Sarah burst through the door, her arms loaded with bags. "Okay, I've got hats, scarves, and some cute pixie-cut photos for inspiration. We're going to get through this," she declared, her voice filled with determination. Emily managed a weak smile as Sarah worked her magic, trying to salvage what was left of her hair. While Sarah busied herself with Emily, I sat down with Michael and told him the whole sordid history with Gertrude, the years of tension, the endless battles, and how I had let her get too close. "I can't believe I ever let that woman near Emily," I said, the guilt clawing at me. Michael squeezed my hand, his voice steady. "This isn't your fault, Sophia. You were just trying to do right by your daughter. You were doing your best." His words were comforting, but deep down, I knew this was far from over. Sarah chimed in, her voice firm. "The only person to blame here is that old bat, Gertrude." I nodded, but the guilt gnawed at me. How could I have been so blind? As the night wore on, Emily finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. Sarah and Michael insisted on staying, setting up camp in the living room. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent vow. Gertrude would pay for what she had done, one way or another. My baby girl deserved nothing less. The next few days were a blur of tears, anger, and sleepless nights. Emily refused to leave her room, let alone go to school. I called in sick, knowing she needed me more than anything. "Sweetie, you can't hide forever," I said gently, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I look like a freak." "Mom," Emily sobbed, "everyone's going to laugh at me." My heart shattered all over again. "No, baby, you're beautiful, inside and out. We'll get through this together." Our first stop was the police station, but it was a massive disappointment. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but since there was no physical harm, this is a civil matter," the officer said, barely looking up from his desk. "No physical harm?" I exploded, gesturing toward Emily. "Look at my daughter." But rules were rules, apparently. So, our next stop was a lawyer. "We can definitely pursue charges for emotional abuse," the lawyer explained, "and sue for damages. But it won't be easy." I didn't care. I was out for blood. Sarah was a rock through it all, helping me document everything, photos, timelines, you name it. She kept me focused. "We're going to nail that old witch to the wall," Sarah declared as we worked late into the night, and I was determined to make sure she was right. Meanwhile, Michael was working his own magic. "I've got a buddy who specializes in family law," he told me. "Top-notch guy. He's willing to take your case pro bono." I could have kissed him right then and there, but there was no time for that. Things were about to get even messier. It started with whispers at the grocery store, sidelong glances from neighbors, then came the calls from distant relatives. "Sophia, is it true you've been neglecting Emily?" my cousin asked, concern dripping from her voice. That's when it hit me. Gertrude was on the offensive. "She's telling everyone I'm an unfit mother," I raged to Sarah and Michael. "That witch is trying to turn the whole world against me." But Gertrude had underestimated me. I started digging, calling up old babysitters, family friends, anyone who'd ever interacted with her and Emily. The stories I uncovered made my blood run cold. Grandma said if I told you, she'd send me away to boarding school, Emily confessed one night, tears streaming down her face. She used to lock me in the closet when I misbehaved. I pulled her close, fury and guilt battling inside me. How could I have missed this? It's not your fault, sweetie, I assured her, holding back my own tears. But I promise you, Grandma will never hurt you again. With Sarah and Michael's help, we devised a plan. Hidden cameras went up around the house. We coached Emily on how to safely gather evidence if Gertrude tried to contact her. Remember, kiddo, Michael said, showing Emily how to use the voice recorder on her phone. If Grandma calls or comes over, hit this button right away. Emily nodded solemnly. I won't let you down, Mom. You can never let me down, baby, I said, hugging her tightly. We're in this together. As we finalized our preparations, a grim determination settled over me. Gertrude thought she could bully and manipulate her way to victory, but she had no idea what was coming. This mama bear was ready to fight, and I wasn't about to lose. All right, team, I said, looking at Sarah and Michael, let's take this witch down. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for Gertrude to make her move, and when she did, we'd be ready. The day of the trial finally arrived, and my stomach churned with nerves. Emily squeezed my hand as we walked into the courtroom. You got this, Mom, she whispered. Our lawyer presented the mountain of evidence we had collected. The hidden camera footage was damning, showing Gertrude barging into our home, screaming threats at Emily. You ungrateful little brat. Her voice echoed in the courtroom. I'll teach you to disobey me. I saw the judge's face darken, but that was just the beginning. One by one, witnesses took the stand, former babysitters, family friends, even Emily's old piano teacher. Each one shared chilling stories of Gertrude's cruelty. Piece by piece, the case against her grew stronger, and I could see her smug confidence slowly crumbling. She told me if I didn't make Emily practice for 3 hours a day, she'd have me fired, the piano teacher testified. But the rail kicker came when Emily took the stand. My brave girl stood there, her voice trembling but resolute. Grandma said if I ever told Mom what she did, she'd make sure I was taken away, Emily said, her eyes welling up with tears. My heart shattered as I watched her speak, tears streaming down my face. How had I not seen this? Gertrude's lawyer tried to spin her as a concerned grandmother, but it was too late. The truth was out, and everyone could see it. When the judge finally announced his decision, I nearly collapsed from relief. This court grants a permanent restraining order against the defendant, he declared. Furthermore, significant damages are awarded for the plaintiff's therapy and emotional distress. It was over. Gertrude was out of our lives for good. Outside the courtroom, Gertrude approached us, tears in her eyes. Sophia, Emily, I'm so sorry, she began. I cut her off, my voice cold. Save it, Gertrude, you're dead to us. Without looking back, we walked away, and for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The next few months were tough, but we got through it together. Emily started therapy and, little by little, began coming out of her shell. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table with Sarah and Michael, Emily made an announcement. I want to donate the money from the lawsuit, she said, her voice steady, to help other kids like me. I couldn't have been prouder of her. As for me and Michael, well, let's just say he became a permanent fixture in our lives. His steady support through everything meant the world to us. But the real turning point came about 6 months after the trial. I think the question of whether some betrayals are unforgivable is deeply personal and complex. It really depends on the context of the betrayal, the nature of the relationship, and individual values and experiences. In cases where trust has been profoundly violated, like with Gertrude's actions, forgiveness can be incredibly difficult. Some people might find it hard to move past such deep hurts, and in those cases, the focus might shift to healing and moving forward rather than reconciliation. On the other hand, forgiveness can be a powerful tool for personal peace and growth. It doesn't always mean forgetting or reconciling, but it can be about releasing the hold that anger or resentment has on you. Sometimes, Forgiveness can even pave the way for personal transformation and a healthier future, even if it doesn't include the person who caused the harm. Ultimately, whether or not to forgive and how to handle betrayal is a personal decision. It's important to do what feels right for your own well-being and growth. Do you think there are certain boundaries that should never be crossed? Or do you see forgiveness as a way to heal even the deepest wounds?
The sun's rays were dappled by the swaying trees overhead, filtering golden light onto the pristine aisle where I was soon to walk. I, Mia Thompson, clad in an elegant white gown, peeked out from behind the grand wooden doors of the chapel, eager to steal a glimpse of the eagerly waiting guests. The soft murmur of voices combined with the melodic hum of the string quartet playing in the background. Emma, my lifelong friend and maid of honor, linked her arm through mine, squeezing gently. "You look like something out of a fairy tale, Mia." I chuckle softly, brushing an errant tear. "Thank you. I've been dreaming about this day since I was a little girl." Emma smiled, her eyes glistening. "And Richard is a lucky man." Yet, even as the warmth of the moment enveloped us, I couldn't help but notice Richard from afar. Dressed in a crisp black tux, his dark hair brushed back, he looked every bit the handsome groom. But my heart caught when I observed him locking eyes with a girl seated among the guests. She had raven black hair, pinned up elegantly, and wore a dress that perfectly matched the wedding's pastel theme. Emma followed my gaze and whispered, "Who's she? Do you know her?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't recognize her. Maybe she's from Richard's side of the family?" Before Emma could reply, the quartet's music crescendoed into the bridal march, and the chapel doors slowly swung open. As I began my walk, the curious exchange between Richard and the mysterious girl plagued my mind. My father, sensing my distraction, whispered reassuringly, "It's okay, sweetheart. Just focus on the moment." The ceremony was a beautiful blur. The priest's solemn words, our vows, and the elation that coursed through me as we were declared husband and wife. The chapel erupted in applause as we shared our first kiss as a married couple, but amidst the joy, the seed of doubt had been planted. At the reception, while everyone reveled in the festivities, I found myself scanning the crowd, searching for the unfamiliar face that had unsettled me. My thoughts were interrupted by Richard, who approached holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To us," he said, clinking his glass against mine. I forced a smile, taking a sip. "To us," I echoed, hoping that the uneasy feeling would soon pass and that the day would remain as I had always envisioned it. Perfect. The aroma of fresh paint and blooming roses welcomed us to our new home, a 2-story house situated in a peaceful neighborhood. I had dreamt of owning a house with a white picket fence, and Richard had made sure we found just the right one. Large bay windows spilled sunlight into the living room, and our laughter echoed through the halls as we tried arranging our furniture. "This one here," Richard said, pushing the deep blue couch closer to the fireplace and the bookshelf there, by the window. "What do you think?" I surveyed the room, imagining cozy winter nights and sun-dappled mornings. "It's perfect," I murmured. Days turned into weeks, and life fell into a predictable, comfortable routine. Mornings were a hurried affair with Richard scrambling eggs while I toasted bread. Evenings, we'd cozy up on the couch, talking about our day. But as time ticked by, something shifted. Richard began coming home late, his tie askew, his eyes weary. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just the strain of settling into a new life. But one night, after he missed yet another dinner, I found myself waiting by the window, watching the street for his familiar car. When he finally walked in past midnight, I couldn't hide my concern. "Richard, you've been coming home late so often. What's going on?" He avoided my gaze, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's just work, Mia. There's a big project, and I'm trying to make a good impression." I nodded, though his explanation did little to quell my anxiety. "I understand, but you have to take care of yourself. And us. It feels like we're drifting apart." He sighed, pulling me close. I promise, Mia. It's just a phase. Things will get back to normal soon. Yet, days turned into weeks, and the distance between us grew. Conversations became perfunctory, and our cozy evenings turned into solitary nights with me curled up with a book and Richard glued to his laptop. One evening, as I served dinner, I tried to breach the subject again. Richard, we need to talk. This isn't us. We promised to be each other's rock, but lately, it feels like I'm living with a stranger. He looked up, his eyes shadowed with guilt. Mia, I'm so sorry. Let me make it up to you. How about a weekend getaway? I smiled weakly, hoping against hope that a brief escape could mend the growing rift between us. All right, I whispered. A weekend away might be just what we need. But as the days rolled on, the promise of a weekend away was overshadowed by Richard's announcement of a month-long business trip. And once again, doubt and uncertainty crept into our new beginning. The morning was cool, and the sky painted a gentle hue of lilac as I prepared breakfast. The kettle hissed, filling the room with the scent of brewing coffee. Richard shuffled in, looking unusually pensive. He hesitated before sitting at the breakfast nook. Mia, he began, avoiding my eyes. There's something I need to tell you. I placed a steaming mug in front of him, my heart skipping a beat. What is it? He sighed heavily, taking a long sip before speaking. Work wants me to head overseas for a month-long assignment. It's an incredible opportunity, Maya, but I know it's a long time to be away. I tried to mask my disappointment, remembering his late nights and the distance that had already grown between us. A month, Richard, that's an awfully long time. Can't someone else go? Richard frowned, seemingly choosing his words carefully. It's a big project, and they believe I'm the best fit. I didn't want to let the team down. Memories of our recent estrangement clouded my mind, and it was hard to shake off the feeling of unease. I understand work commitments, Richard. I replied, my voice steady, but what about our commitments? What about the weekend getaway you promised? Doesn't that mean anything? He reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine. I'm sorry, Mia. I promise I'll make it up to you. Let's go away somewhere special when I return. As days passed, my apprehension grew. The house felt emptier, its walls echoing with unsaid words and unshared moments. The evening before his departure, we had a quiet dinner. It felt more like a truce than a farewell. He spoke of the places he'd visit and the work he'd be doing, trying to paint a vivid picture of his impending journey. I listened, nodding and smiling, but an insidious doubt gnawed at me. That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, haunted by thoughts of the mysterious girl at our wedding and the growing gulf between Richard and me. Somewhere around dawn, I was roused by hushed tones emanating from the next room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed closer to the door, pressing my ear against its cool surface. No! She doesn't suspect a thing, Richard's voice floated through, tinged with anxiety. I've told her it's a business trip. We'll have a month just like we planned. My heart raced. My mind tried to dismiss it as a fragment of a dream. But the words, their implications, and Richard's secretive tone were unmistakable. The next morning, he left with a brief kiss on my forehead and a promise to call as soon as he landed. As the door closed behind him, I felt a mix of fear, anger, and betrayal. The seeds of doubt planted on our wedding day had grown into a looming tree, casting a shadow on everything I thought I knew about our relationship. The silence that followed Richard's departure was oppressive. I wandered our home, touching familiar objects as though seeking solace from them. The photograph from our honeymoon in Santorini, the ceramic vase we bought on our first date, every corner was a testament to our shared history. Yet, that overheard conversation rang in my ears, raising questions I was afraid to confront. I mustered up courage and dialed his office, hoping to speak to his boss. After a few redirects, Mr. Brennan, Richard's supervisor, answered. Ah, Mia! How can I help you? His voice was genial, but businesslike. I was just wondering about Richard's assignment, I began, feigning casual curiosity. He left for a month-long trip today. I was hoping to surprise him with something when he returns. Can you give me any details? There was a brief, loaded pause. Maya? He hesitated. I'm not aware of any business trip. In fact, Richard hasn't been with the company for the past month. My world swirled, threatening to shatter. But that's impossible, I protested weakly. He leaves for work every morning. I'm truly sorry, Mia, Mr. Brennan replied, genuine concern lacing his tone. I thought you knew. He was let go due to some discrepancies we found. Ending the call, a tidal wave of emotions washed over me. Betrayal, confusion, anger, each sentiment jostling for attention. Driven by a sudden impulse, I scoured Richard's study. Amid a mess of papers, an airline ticket stub caught my eye. The destination wasn't any business hub, but a tropical island. I was seized with an idea and logged into our joint account. A quick perusal showed a sharp decline in our balance. Over $200,000 had been siphoned off within days. My blood ran cold. Could Richard really deceive me on such a scale? It was time for clarity. I reached out to Jake, an old friend from college who had become a private investigator. He had always been astute and had a knack for uncovering the truth. Over a coffee at a quiet cafe, I poured out my story. Jake frowned, listening intently. Let me get this straight. Richard lied about his job, took off on a mysterious business trip, and there's a significant amount missing from your account. I nodded, struggling to hold back tears. We'll get to the bottom of this, Mia, he said with determination. Give me a day or two. A whirlwind 48 hours followed. Jake used his contacts, tapped into flight details, and tracked credit card usage. What he uncovered was both shocking and heart-wrenching. Photos emerged capturing Richard with the same mysterious woman from our wedding. The two seemed to be having the time of their lives, carefree and in love. As the evidence piled up, the facade of our marriage crumbled. Every whispered "I love you," every shared dream appeared to be nothing more than elaborate lies. I wasn't just dealing with the aftermath of an affair. I was grappling with a realization that my life as I knew it had been a deception. The house felt different without Richard's presence, as though it too were bearing the weight of betrayal. Night after night, I'd sit in the dimly lit living room, clutching a glass of wine and rehashing every moment of our relationship, searching for missed signs. One evening, amidst my introspection, a quiet knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door to find Sarah, my best friend since childhood. She had an uncanny ability to sense when I was in distress, even without me saying a word. She wrapped me in a comforting hug, her warmth providing a momentary respite. Hey, how are you holding up? I sighed, guiding her inside. Every day feels like a challenge, Sarah. But I can't let Richard's betrayal define me. Sarah, her eyes filled with concern and pride, replied, That's the spirit. Remember, you're strong and you've got this. As the night wore on, our conversation shifted from heartbreak to action. What are you planning to do about the money? She asked. I've already blocked the card, I began, feeling a newfound determination. He can't use any more of it. But I need to get back what he took. Sarah nodded, her gaze steely. He can't get away with this, Mia. You should consider pressing charges. The following week was a whirlwind of legal consultations, paperwork, and strategic planning. My attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Clara Green, was a beacon of support and guidance. She assured me that with the evidence at hand, we had a strong case. During one of our meetings, she looked at me intently. Mia, I know this is tough, but remember, this isn't just about the money. It's about reclaiming your life. Her words struck a chord. While I initially sought justice for the stolen funds, I realized that this fight was about more than that. It was about standing up against deceit, reclaiming my identity, and setting a precedent that such actions have consequences. Days later, I received an irate call from Richard. His voice, once comforting, now dripped with desperation. "Mia, why did you block the card? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was when it was declined?" I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength. "You shouldn't have taken what wasn't yours, Richard. I trusted you, and you betrayed me. Now you'll face the consequences." His threats and pleas fell on deaf ears. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened. With the help of Jake, we managed to get a tip on Richard's location. Acting on the information, local law enforcement, in collaboration with Interpol, apprehended him. News of his arrest was bittersweet. As I saw him being escorted, handcuffed, a flurry of emotions enveloped me. The love and trust we shared were now tainted memories, replaced by images of his deceit. But amidst the chaos, I found a silver lining. I was taking control of my narrative, refusing to be just another victim of betrayal. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations and the shuffling of papers. As I took my seat, I glanced around, spotting familiar faces. Sarah, Jake, and a few close colleagues. Their presence was a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone in this battle. At the front, Richard, now looking disheveled and defeated, awaited the commencement of proceedings. Our eyes met briefly, his filled with regret and apprehension. Mine resolute. The judge, an older, stern-looking gentleman with silver hair, called the courtroom to order. As the proceedings began, the air was thick with tension. Miss Green was eloquent, methodically presenting evidence of Richard's deceit, financial fraud, and the emotional trauma he'd inflicted upon me. The pictures of Richard and the other woman, bank statements, and testimonies from Jake and Mr. Brennan built a damning case against him. Richard's attorney, a nervous-looking young man, tried to paint a picture of Richard as a misguided husband, led astray by seduction and bad decisions. "Your Honor," he implored, "Mr. Hamilton acknowledges his mistakes and seeks leniency." As the testimonies proceeded, Sarah was called to the stand. With a steely resolve, she spoke of our friendship and the countless nights I'd spent confiding in her, torn apart by the betrayal. Then came my moment. As I approached the stand, memories flooded back. The joyful moments, the crushing discovery of his infidelity, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Drawing a deep breath, I began, "We promised each other a lifetime, but what I received in return was a web of lies." Miss Green, gently guiding my testimony, asked, "And how has this betrayal affected you, Mia?" I took a moment, collecting my thoughts. Its shattered trust, made me question my own judgment, and left a gaping void in what was supposed to be the most secure part of my life. While I seek justice for the financial fraud, no verdict can compensate for the emotional upheaval. The courtroom was silent, hanging on to every word. As the trial came to a close, the judge, after brief deliberation, delivered his verdict. Given the evidence presented and the testimony heard, it is clear that Mr. Hamilton not only committed financial fraud, but also caused considerable emotional distress. He is hereby sentenced to 2 years in prison and is mandated to repay the stolen amount. A chorus of murmurs erupted. Richard's face paled, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. Outside the courtroom, as the sun began to set, Sarah and Jake flanked me. "You did it, Mia," Sarah whispered, her eyes moist. "It's finally over," Jake added. "Justice has been served, but remember, this is just the beginning. There's a whole life ahead, free from Richard's shadows." I nodded, realizing that while one chapter of my life had come to a tumultuous close, another filled with hope and new beginnings was about to commence. Months passed since the trial, and the seasons changed, marking the passage of time and the shift in my life's trajectory. The beautiful autumnal hues reflected my inner transformation, from the pain of betrayal to the warmth of newfound resilience. I'd taken a sabbatical from work, needing time away from the city's bustle to heal. Sarah's cottage in the countryside became my sanctuary. surrounded by open fields, chirping birds, and a serenity that the urban landscape couldn't offer. I began to piece my life back together. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, Sarah joined me, handing me a letter with no return address. My heart raced. The handwriting was unmistakably Richard's. Sarah, sensing my apprehension, said, "You don't have to read it if you're not ready." Taking a deep breath, I began to read. The letter was filled with confessions, apologies, and reflections on his mistakes. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation, but rather an acknowledgement of his wrongdoings and the pain he'd caused. "I never meant for things to escalate this way," it read. "The allure of another life away from our routine blinded me. But by the time I realized my folly, I was too deep into the lie. I'm truly sorry, Mia. I hope in time you find it in your heart to forgive me, not for my sake, but for your own peace." I folded the letter, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and contemplation. Sarah, ever the voice of reason, gently remarked, "He's given his perspective, Mia. But closure is a personal journey. It's up to you how or if you want to respond." Days turned into weeks, and the letter weighed heavily on my mind. One crisp morning, inspired by the serene landscape, I penned my response. Richard, I began, "Your letter was unexpected. The pain and betrayal I felt were profound. But through the darkness I've found strength, understanding, and self-worth. While I can't forget, I choose to forgive. Not for you, but for me. I wish you a life of reflection and hope you find the redemption you seek." Sending the letter was cathartic. It felt like releasing the last tether that bound me to the past. The following months were transformative. I returned to work with renewed vigor, took up new hobbies, and even started a support group for individuals recovering from personal betrayals. Jake and Sarah remained my pillars, and together we celebrated life's small joys. One evening, as we gathered at our favorite bistro, Sarah raised her glass to new beginnings, unwavering friendships, and the power of closure. Jake smiled, adding to Maya for showing us that no matter how challenging the journey, there's always light at the end. I grinned, my heart full, to life with all its twists and turns. May we always find our way. And as the night enveloped the city, I felt genuinely free, ready to embrace the future, unburdened and with an open heart.
Our story began on a bright, sunny day, filled with promises of new beginnings. The scent of blooming flowers filled the air, and birds sang joyfully as they welcomed the dawn of a new day. I was filled with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation, knowing that today was the day I would marry Jack, the love of my life. From the moment I met Jack, I knew there was something special about him. His gentle smile, his kind eyes, and the way he made me feel as if I were the only person in the world. We connected on a level that was both profound and simple, understanding each other's thoughts and dreams. As I stood before the mirror, adjusting my veil and taking in the reflection of the woman about to embark on a new journey, my best friend and maid of honor, Emily, came into the room. "You look stunning, Linda," she said, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Thank you, Em," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "I can't believe this day is finally here." "You and Jack are perfect for each other," Emily assured me, wrapping her arms around me. "I know you'll be incredibly happy together." Her words filled me with warmth, and I knew she was right. Jack and I were meant to be. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and laughter. Our friends and family gathered to celebrate our union, their faces glowing with genuine happiness. Jack looked handsome in his tailored suit, his eyes twinkling with joy as he took my hand. "Do you, Linda, take Jack to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the minister asked, his voice filled with solemnity. "I do," I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. "And do you, Jack, take Linda to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jack said, squeezing my hand reassuringly. Our vows were exchanged, our rings placed, and our love sealed with a kiss. It was the beginning of the rest of our lives. However, not all was as perfect as it seemed. Among the sea of smiling faces, there was one that seemed out of place. Jack's mother, Mrs. Robinson, stood in the corner, her lips pressed into a thin line and her eyes filled with something that I couldn't quite place. During the reception, she approached me, her voice dripping with insincerity. "Linda, dear, it's so lovely to meet you," she said, her eyes scanning me up and down. "I must say, I expected someone different for my son." "Thank you, Mrs. Robinson," I replied, struggling to keep my composure. "I hope to make Jack as happy as he makes me." She said, her eyes narrowing. "We'll see about that. Jack has always had high standards. I hope you can live up to them." Her words were like ice, and I could feel the happiness of the day slipping away. I forced a smile and excused myself, feeling a sinking feeling in my stomach. I told myself that it didn't matter, that her opinion was unimportant, but her words stuck with me, casting a shadow over what should have been the happiest day of my life. As the day turned into night, Jack and I danced, and I tried to forget about Mrs. Robinson. Jack's love was all that mattered, and I knew that we could face anything together. But even as we swayed to the music, her words lingered, a haunting reminder that not everyone was happy about our union. Our blissful beginning was marred by her presence, but I was determined not to let her ruin our love. Little did I know that her words were just the beginning of a nightmare that would test our love and change our lives forever. The excitement of the wedding soon gave way to the gentle routines of daily life. Jack and I settled into our cozy little house, filled with love and the dreams of a shared future. Our days were punctuated by laughter, loving glances, and the bliss of each other's company. It didn't take long for me to fall into the rhythm of being a wife, preparing meals for us, decorating our home, and taking care of all the little things that made our house a home. Jack was supportive and loving, always appreciating my efforts and contributing his share as well. However, there was a dark cloud that loomed over our idyllic life. Mrs. Robinson. The nagging and negative energy that she brought into our home during her frequent visits began to wear on me. Her snide remarks and criticisms were impossible to ignore. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Mrs. Robinson arrived unannounced. I tried to welcome her with a smile, but her immediate comment took me aback. "Linda, dear, this table setting is all wrong." "How could you not know how to properly set a table?" she snapped, rearranging the silverware. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Robinson. I thought it looked nice," I stammered, feeling my cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Clearly you have much to learn," she replied, her tone dripping with condescension. Later that night, after Mrs. Robinson had left, I broke down in tears. Jack held me, trying to comfort me. "She's just set in her ways, love," he said, stroking my hair. "Don't take it to heart." "But Jack, it's never ending," I sobbed. "She finds fault with everything I do. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells whenever she's around." "I know it's hard, Linda," he said softly, "but she's my mother, and we have to find a way to get along with her." His words were well intentioned, but they didn't ease my frustration. I knew he was caught in a difficult position, but it was becoming unbearable for me. The situation escalated when Mrs. Robinson came to our house one day with her suitcases in tow. Her announcement that she was moving in sent shockwaves through me. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just move in without discussing it with us first." "It's settled then," Mrs. Robinson said smugly, ignoring my protests. "I'll be staying in the guest room." "But, Mother, don't you think we should talk about this first?" Jack interjected, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Nonsense, Jack," she snapped. "I'm your mother, and this is where I belong." I felt trapped, caught in a situation that was spiraling out of control. The cozy home that Jack and I had built was being invaded, and I felt powerless to stop it. As the days turned into weeks, Mrs. Robinson's presence became a constant source of tension and resentment. Her demands, her criticisms, and her complete disregard for my feelings were suffocating. Jack and I tried to keep the peace, to find a balance, but the strain was beginning to show. The bliss of our new life was being overshadowed by the dark cloud of Mrs. Robinson's influence. As we struggled to maintain our love and happiness, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a battle, one that would test our relationship and our resolve. The seeds of discontent were sown, and I knew that the storm was coming. Life had taken a dark turn. Our home, once filled with love and laughter, had become a battleground. Mrs. Robinson's incessant nagging, her constant criticism, and her total lack of respect for my place in our home were grinding me down. Her presence was like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over everything. Simple tasks like cooking or cleaning became sources of anxiety as I anticipated her next critical remark or demeaning comment. One day, as I was preparing lunch, she walked into the kitchen, her eyes immediately scanning for something to find fault with. "You're cutting those vegetables all wrong, Linda," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Haven't you learned anything about cooking by now?" "I'm doing the best I can, Mrs. Robinson," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jack seems to enjoy my cooking just fine." "That's because he doesn't know any better," she sneered. "But don't worry, I'll teach you how to cook properly. It's the least I can do for my poor son." Her words were like daggers, cutting deep into my self-esteem. I felt small, insignificant, and trapped. Jack tried to mediate, but it only seemed to make things worse. One night, after another unbearable day, I broke down in front of him. "I can't take it anymore. Jack," I sobbed, "I feel like I'm losing myself. Your mother treats me like a servant, not like your wife." "I know it's hard, Linda," he said, holding me close. "But she's my mother, and I can't just turn her away." "You're choosing her over me," I cried, pulling away from him. "Don't you see what she's doing to us?" "Linda, please try to understand," he pleaded, his voice filled with desperation. "I'm caught in the middle here. I love you both, but Jack, love isn't supposed to feel like this," I said, my voice breaking. "I feel like I'm drowning, and you're not doing anything to save me." We sat in silence, the weight of our situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. Our love was being tested, stretched to its limits, and I didn't know how much more I could take. The days turned into weeks, and the situation only worsened. Mrs. Robinson's behavior became more erratic, her demands more unreasonable. She would order me around like a maid, expecting me to wait on her hand and foot. Her cruel words became more personal, more cutting. "You'll never be good enough for my son," she spat one day, her eyes filled with malice. "You're a poor excuse for a wife. I don't know what he ever saw in you." Her words struck me like a physical blow, and I retreated to our bedroom, tears streaming down my face. I felt defeated, broken, and utterly alone. Jack's attempts to placate his mother were futile, and I could see the strain it was putting on him. Our relationship was fraying at the edges, the trust and intimacy replaced by resentment and frustration. I knew that something had to change, that we couldn't go on like this. But the fear of losing Jack, the fear of being alone, kept me paralyzed. As I lay in bed one night, unable to sleep, I realized that I had to take control of my life. I had to find a way to stand up for myself, to reclaim my identity, and to save my marriage. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that the battle was far from over, but I was ready to fight, ready to take back my life. Our home had become a living nightmare, but I was determined to wake up and take control of my destiny. No matter what it took, I was ready to face the storm and come out on the other side, stronger and more resilient. Little did I know, the storm was about to take a dark and dangerous turn, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love trust, and revenge. The tension in our home had reached its zenith, and I felt as though I was standing on a precipice, staring into an abyss. Mrs. Robinson's malicious behavior escalated, her insults becoming more vitriolic, her demands more ludicrous. One morning, after having prepared breakfast, I presented the plates, only to have her dismiss my efforts with a wave of her hand. "What is this slop?" she sneered, pushing her plate away. "I thought I taught you how to cook something decent." "Mrs. Robinson, I tried to make it just how you like it," I said, my voice trembling. "Tried. Clearly you failed," she spat. Jack's face went red, and for the first time, he stood up to his mother. "Mother, enough. Linda has done nothing but try to please you. It's time you show her some respect." Mrs. Robinson's face twisted into a mask of rage. "Respect? For her, she's destroying our family, and you're too blind to see it." "I'm not blind." "Mother," Jack said, his voice firm, "what I see is you treating my wife with nothing but contempt. This has to stop." The room was filled with a heavy silence, the air thick with tension. Mrs. Robinson's eyes narrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "What has she done to you, Jack?" she finally said, her voice dripping with malice. "How has she twisted you against me?" "Mother, no one has twisted me against you," Jack replied, his voice cracking with emotion. "But you are tearing us apart. We can't continue like this." The confrontation was a turning point, a moment of clarity that made me realize that I had to take drastic action. I had to reclaim my life, my marriage, and my dignity. Jack's willingness to stand up to his mother gave me the strength to make a decision. I needed to find a way to bring peace to our home, to mend the rift that had formed between us. And then came the day of Mrs. Robinson's birthday. I knew that it was a chance to extend an olive branch, to try and mend fences. I carefully selected a beautiful piece of jewelry, hoping that the gesture would be a step towards reconciliation. But the birthday celebration turned into a disaster. As we sat down at the dinner table, I nervously handed her the gift, trying to put on a brave smile. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Robinson," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She took the box and opened it, her eyes widening as she saw the jewelry inside. Then, without a word, she tossed it aside. "I don't need this cheap thing," she snapped, her eyes filled with disdain. "Mother!" Jack exclaimed, his face pale with shock. Without another word, she struck me across the face, her eyes blazing with anger. "You think this will make up for everything you've done? You think this will buy my love?" I stumbled back, tears welling in my eyes. The room spun, and I felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under me. The humiliation, the pain, the betrayal, it was all too much. "That's it," I said, my voice filled with determination. "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving." "Linda, please, let's talk about this," Jack pleaded, his eyes filled with fear. "No, Jack," I said, shaking my head. "I need to be alone." And with that, I left, my heart breaking, my mind reeling. The breaking point had come, and I knew that things could never be the same. As I walked towards my friend's house, my thoughts were a whirlwind of emotion. I knew that I had to find a way to heal, to rebuild, and to find my strength. But little did I know. The storm was far from over, and the darkest hour was yet to come. The phone call that awaited me would change everything, unraveling a web of deceit that would challenge everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and revenge. My mind was a storm of emotions as I sought refuge at my friend's house. The events of the day were too much to bear. I needed space to think, to heal, but fate had other plans. About an hour after my departure, my phone rang. It was a number I recognized all too well, and my heart sank as I answered. "Linda!" It was Mrs. Robinson, her voice filled with panic and tears. "It's Jack. He's fallen unconscious and I don't know what to do." "What?" I exclaimed, fear gripping my heart. "What happened?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "He just collapsed. Please come home. I don't know what to do." Without a second thought, I rushed home, my mind racing, terror consuming me. As I arrived, I found Mrs. Robinson in a state of complete disarray, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Where is he?" I demanded, rushing past her. "In the living room," she stammered, following me. I found Jack sprawled on the floor, unconscious, his face pale. I immediately called an ambulance and began performing key PR, praying that it wasn't too late. "Why didn't you call an ambulance?" I screamed at Mrs. Robinson, my anger rising. "What were you thinking?" I didn't know what to do," she stammered, her eyes wide with fear. "I was so scared, Linda." "You should have called for help," I yelled, my heart pounding in my chest. "What if he doesn't make it because of your delay?" The paramedics arrived, taking over the key PR and quickly transporting Jack to the hospital. I followed, my mind in turmoil, fear and anger battling within me. At the hospital, the doctors worked diligently to stabilize Jack. After what felt like an eternity, they informed me that his condition was most likely caused by a substance that someone had put in his glass. "What do you mean, a substance?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Are you saying he was poisoned?" "It appears so," the doctor replied gravely. "We're doing everything we can to flush it out of his system, but we need to find out what it was to provide the best treatment." A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized the implication of his words. I looked at Mrs. Robinson, her face ashen, her eyes filled with guilt. "Did you do this?" I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. She broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to poison you," she sobbed. "I wanted to get rid of you, but I must have mixed up the glasses. I never meant to hurt my son." "You monster!" I screamed, my body shaking with anger. "How could you?" "I'm sorry," she wailed, falling to her knees. "I didn't mean to. Please don't tell the police. Please, Linda." "You're sorry?" I spat, my voice filled with disbelief. "You tried to kill me, and you almost killed your son. You will pay for this one way or another." As the reality of the situation sunk in, I knew that I had to make a choice. I had to find a way to deal with Mrs. Robinson, to bring her to justice, and to protect my husband. The dark web of deceit was unraveling, and I knew that the battle was far from over. Revenge was on the horizon, and I was ready to take control of my destiny. But first, I had to focus on Jack's recovery, to be there for him, and to find the strength to move forward. The poisoning was a turning point, a dark chapter in our lives that would change everything. And as I stood by Jack's bedside, holding his hand, I knew that our love would be tested like never before. The storm was raging, and I was ready to face it head on, determined to find the truth, to seek justice, and to reclaim our lives. The days following Jack's poisoning were filled with a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. His recovery was slow but steady, and as he regained consciousness, I knew it was time to confront the woman who had nearly destroyed our lives. With a heavy heart, I returned home to face Mrs. Robinson, knowing that I had to get a full confession from her. As I walked through the door, I found her huddled in a corner, her face pale, her eyes filled with terror. "Sit down, Mrs. Robinson," I said coldly, my voice devoid of emotion. "We need to talk." I can explain," she stammered, tears in her eyes. "No," I said, cutting her off. "You will listen to me, and then you will tell me everything. Every detail." She nodded, her body trembling, and I began to recount the horrifying events of the poisoning, my voice steady, my eyes never leaving hers. "You almost killed your son," I said, my voice breaking. "You tried to murder me, and you nearly took the life of the only person you have left in this world. How could you? I was angry. She sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. I was jealous. I wanted you gone. I thought that if you were out of the picture, Jack and I could be a family again. A family? I spat, my anger rising. By killing me. By hurting the person you claim to love? I never meant to hurt Jack, she cried, her body racked with sobs. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, I said, my voice cold. And now you have to face the consequences. I'll do anything, she pleaded, falling to her knees. Please, Linda, don't turn me in. I'll leave. I'll never bother you again. Just please don't destroy what's left of my life. I looked at her, my mind torn. On one hand, I wanted to see her pay for her crimes. On the other, I knew that turning her in would create a media circus and further traumatize Jack. You will leave, I said finally, my voice firm. You will pack your things and you will never come near us again. You will never speak to Jack, never contact us in any way. You will disappear. And if I ever hear from you again, I will not hesitate to go to the police. Mrs. Robinson nodded, her face ashen, her body defeated. I'll do it, she whispered. I'll go. As she packed her things, I watched her, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I knew that I was doing what was best for Jack, for our family, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting her off too easily. Goodbye, Mrs. Robinson, I said, my voice devoid of emotion, as she walked out the door. I hope you find the peace you need to live with what you've done. As the door closed behind her, I felt a mixture of relief and emptiness. The nightmare was over, but the scars would remain. I knew that I had to focus on Jack's recovery, to rebuild our lives, and to find the strength to move forward. But as I stood in the silence of our home, I couldn't help but feel that something had changed, that a part of me had been lost forever. The confession was a turning point, a moment of clarity that allowed me to take control of my destiny, but it was also a reminder of the darkness that lurked within, the capacity for evil that existed in those we thought we knew. As I looked out the window, watching Mrs. Robinson's car disappear into the distance, I knew that I had taken the first step towards healing, towards reclaiming my life. But the journey was far from over, and I knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, with pain, and with the strength to overcome. The confession was a beginning, a chance to start anew, but it was also a stark reminder of the fragility of trust, the complexity of love, and the power of revenge.